'Twas better to die 'neath an Irish sky than at Suvla or Sud El Bar. And the world did gaze in deep amaze at those fearless men and true, who bore the fight that freedom's light might shine through the foggy dew.
I have a few words here. I'll go through it quickly, but I think it's important to put things in context. 100 years ago, the men and women of the Easter Rising took over central Dublin, declared Ireland's independence, and raised the flag of the Irish Republic, which inspired not only the Irish people, but also nations across the globe to seek freedom from their colonial masters. It was a spark that would eventually lead to the dismantling of the British Empire. After 5 days, the rebels were forced to surrender to spare the civilian casualties. The Irish said they were prisoners of war. The British said they were subjects of the Empire and therefore traitors, so they were executed, and thousands were sent to internment camps. Although it was a military defeat for the Irish, it became a moral victory, and it turned out to be the birth of a nation. Who were these men? Padraig Pearse was a poet, a school teacher, a headmaster, and a proponent of the Irish language, and is a big part of the Celtic revival. John McDonough, Michael Hanrahan, Joseph Plunkett were accomplished playwrights, authors, and poets. Artist Willie Pearse, brother of Patrick, was a well-liked painter. Roger Casement was an early human rights advocate. James Connolly was a labor leader, union organizer, and the founder of the International Workers of the World, one of the founders. Why would these people risk their lives in a hopeless cause against the might of the British Empire? Let's look briefly at the history of the relationship between Ireland and England. Ireland is England's first and oldest colony. There was no way they were going to let them go without a fight. The treatment of Ireland by the English was atrocious historically. Henry VIII, who was a psychopath, killed 2 of his 6 wives, tried to ban Catholicism and forced the Irish to become Anglicans. Queen Elizabeth called for the hanging of all harpists, Irish harpists, and the burning of their harps. Cromwell slaughtered entire cities of people like Wexford and Drogheda, and drove the native Irish to the west. His battle cry was to hell or Connacht for the Irish, while giving the best land to the remaining provinces to the English aristocracy and officers in his army. If that's not ethnic cleansing, I don't know what is. The penal laws made apartheid look like a walk in the park. It was illegal to speak their Irish language, practice their religion, play their own sports, hold public office, own land, or even marry a Protestant. The final straw was the famine, 1845 to 50, which is actually more like genocide. The Irish were dependent on the potato because it grew well in the rocky slopes they were banished to. So when the potato blight hit Europe, the Irish died en masse, about 1 million of them, huddled in their homes, along roadsides, their faces green from eating grass. I've seen the lumpy famine fields where the Irish were buried in mass graves that to this day no one will plow. Ireland was a major producer of crops and livestock during the famine, but the Irish peasants had no money, so they starved in the worst example of free market capitalism. Britain's colonial administrator at the time of the famine, Lord Trevelyan, said the potato blight was the hand of God and the cure for too many Irish. Ancient history, some might say, but the famine was less than 70 years before the Easter Rising. Now, World War II was a little over 70 years. Could you imagine telling a Jewish person to forget about the Holocaust? It was fresh in their minds. Let's skip ahead to today. I'm happy to report the Irish are finally comfortable in honoring the men and women of the Easter Rising. For 30 years, only Irish Republicans like Sinn Féin praised the men of 16. The Dublin establishment feared honoring the men who used physical force to get their freedom would justify the rebels of the North fighting for their freedom. Also, revisionists were gaining ground. These Monday morning quarterbacks kept saying that the Rising was wrong, that they would eventually get freedom without having to use force. But while we were in Dublin last month, the Irish President, Michael Higgins, made a speech, and he put the revisionists in their place, hopefully once and for all. He said that the revisionists were wrong, and that given the context of the time, the rebel leaders were justified to use force to get the Brits out. Irish newspapers reported that 1 million people took part in Easter Rising commemorations throughout Ireland this year. and we were a witness to some of it. On Good Friday, we went to the Kilmainham jail tour, which is usually pretty empty, and there was a line of people down the block. And I talked to the people there. They said that was the biggest crowd they've ever had, and they were locals. I have a friend who does the 1916 Rebel walking tour for over 20 years now, and he said his tours were packed with locals. There was never any locals on it before. If one did come, they were embarrassed. So we live in an exciting time for Ireland right now. It's a time when our goals of Irish unity, equality, and peace have taken giant steps forward. But the objectives of a national government representing the whole people of Ireland, as stated in the Proclamation, has not yet been achieved. The Good Friday Agreement, which brought peace to the country, has a provision calling for a referendum on unification of Ireland. Many in Ireland are saying now is the time. Today we seek an agreed, reconciled, and united Ireland by peaceful and democratic means, because this is the context of our times. When people see the justice of that idea, it can catch fire and change can happen very, very quickly. The 1916 Proclamation explicitly praises the role of Irish America. To quote the Proclamation, and supported by our exiled children in America, the only other country than Ireland mentioned in the Proclamation. So when that day comes of a united Ireland, what role will you have played? Gormia Magat.